The bitter cold of the pine forest at night was something Marcus had come to appreciate. In his isolated cabin, where temperatures always dropped below freezing after sunset, he had developed peculiar habits for survival. One of them was sleeping without clothes, a pragmatic adaptation to the cramped, frigid space he called home. It allowed him to monitor his body's response to the cold, to feel every draft that might indicate a structural weakness in his shelter. Tonight was no different. The wooden beams creaked under the weight of accumulated snow as he drifted into sleep, miles away from civilization, cell phone signals, or prying eyes. Just how he preferred it after what he'd seen during his military service. A sudden pressure on his hips jolted Marcus from sleep. His eyes snapped open to darkness, his combat instincts immediately calculating threats before his conscious mind could even process what was happening. The weight was unmistakable. Someone was straddling him. In the dim, blue moonlight filtering through frost-covered windows, he saw her, a woman with pale blue skin, her eyes emitting a faint glow, was kneeling on his chest. Her body radiated an intense cold that penetrated the layers of blankets between them. Every instinct screamed danger. Marcus lurched upward, his hand sliding beneath his pillow for the hunting knife he kept there. His fingers had just touched the handle when her icy hand clamped around his wrist with surprising strength. "If they hear you," she whispered, her breath visible even in the darkness of the cabin, "I will die." The woman's eyes darted toward the ceiling, then to the windows, as if expecting something or someone to appear at any moment. Her entire body shivered violently, the cold she emanated intensifying with each tremor. Marcus assessed his options. He could overpower her. He was certain of that. But something in her desperate expression gave him pause. It wasn't just fear he saw there. It was the look of someone hunted. "Get under the blanket," he commanded in a harsh whisper, his military training taking over. "You're freezing the entire cabin." She complied instantly, sliding beneath the heavy quilt beside him. The shock of her ice-cold skin against his made him flinch, but he forced himself to remain still. Even through the blanket, he could feel her body temperature was dangerously low, far below what any human could survive. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, keeping his voice low. "What are you doing in my cabin?" "My name is Lyra," she replied. Her accent strange, each word precisely pronounced, yet with an odd cadence. "I escaped from a monarchical alliance that was forcing me into a political marriage." Her eyes, still faintly luminous, studied his face with scientific curiosity. "Your body heat. I cannot regulate my temperature on this planet. My thermal control implant was damaged during the escape." Marcus kept his expression neutral, though his mind raced. This woman, if she was even human, was clearly delusional or playing some kind of elaborate game. Yet the unnatural cold of her skin and the strange glow of her eyes defied any rational explanation he could conjure. "You're saying you're not from Earth?" he asked, trying to keep the skepticism from his voice. "Correct." She shifted slightly closer to his warmth, causing another involuntary flinch. "Without your thermal energy, I cannot survive long in this environment." The cabin fell silent, except for the wind howling outside and the occasional crack of tree branches laden with snow. Marcus lay rigid, hyper-aware of the stranger beside him. Throughout the night, he observed her breathing patterns, the way her eyes constantly scanned the cabin's corners, the methodical manner in which she seemed to be assessing his biological responses. He remained tense, curious, yet vigilant, never fully relaxing his guard. Lyra, for her part, seemed content to simply absorb his warmth, occasionally closing her eyes, but never truly sleeping. The long hours passed in this uneasy arrangement, neither willing to break the fragile truce that had formed between them. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the frost-covered windows, Marcus carefully extracted himself from the bed. Lyra's eyes tracked his movement as he quickly dressed in thermal layers. "Stay here," he ordered, reaching for his rifle mounted above the door. "I need to check something." Outside, the forest was silent, the kind of unnatural quiet that follows heavy snowfall. Marcus circled his cabin, eyes scanning the pristine white landscape for any sign of disturbance. Near the western edge of the clearing, he found what he was looking for. Fresh tracks, unlike any he'd ever seen. The imprints were clearly boot-shaped, but with an unusual tread pattern that reminded him of military-grade tactical footwear, only more angular and with strange circular indentations at the heel. The tracks appeared and disappeared at seemingly random intervals, as if whoever or whatever had made them could somehow walk above the snow or vanish entirely between steps. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning cold ran down his spine. When Marcus returned to the cabin, Lyra was sitting upright in his bed, the blankets pulled tightly around her blue-tinged shoulders. She looked weaker in the daylight, her skin now taking on a more mottled appearance, dark patches forming around her neck and wrists. "They're searching for you," he stated flatly, placing his rifle back on its rack. "Those aren't normal boot prints out there." Lyra nodded. "The Royal Guard. They will not stop until they find me or confirm my death." She met his gaze directly. "You are in danger while I remain here." Marcus leaned against the rough-hewn table, arms crossed. "I want answers, complete ones. What exactly are you running from? What are those people capable of? And what happens if they find you here?" "I will tell you everything," she replied, her voice slightly stronger than it had been during the night. "But I require more thermal energy first. My core temperature is still critically low." Marcus hesitated, then reluctantly moved back to the bed, sitting on its edge. "You have until tomorrow morning. Then you need to explain everything clearly, and you absolutely cannot put me in danger." She nodded again, relief evident in her expression as she inched closer to his warmth. Throughout the day, they established an uneasy routine. Marcus would attend to his daily tasks, chopping firewood, checking his traps for game, maintaining his generator, always keeping the cabin in sight. Lyra remained inside, gradually building enough strength to move around the small space, examining his sparse possessions with methodical curiosity. When he returned with a rabbit for their evening meal, she was studying his collection of mechanical parts and tools with an engineer's precision. "You repair machines," she observed as he skinned the rabbit. "Sometimes," he replied. "Mostly engines from the logging trucks when they break down. It pays for supplies I can't produce myself." She lifted a carburetor, turning it over in her blue-tinged hands. "Primitive, but efficient. The combustion process is similar to some of our transport pods, though we abandoned hydrocarbon fuel centuries ago." Marcus chose not to respond to that claim, focusing instead on preparing their meal. As they ate in silence, he noticed she handled the utensils with practiced ease, but approached the food with scientific caution, smelling each bite before tasting it. "Tomorrow," he reminded her as night fell once more. "Full explanation." She nodded, her expression solemn. "If I am still alive." That night, Marcus slept fitfully, never fully relaxing with the stranger beside him. Every sound from the forest outside jarred him to alertness. Each time, he would find Lyra awake, her luminous eyes scanning the darkness beyond the windows. Shortly before dawn, a faint mechanical whirring sound from the forest edge caught his attention. Lyra tensed beside him, her cold hand suddenly gripping his arm. "Thermal scanner," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're searching for my heat signature." Marcus reached for his rifle again, but Lyra shook her head frantically. "Their weapons technology is far beyond yours," she warned. "We need a diversion." The whirring grew louder, accompanied by a faint, red glow, visible through the trees. A pinpoint of light sweeping methodically across the forest floor, moving steadily toward the cabin. "I need minerals," Lyra said urgently. "Iron oxide, copper, anything metallic." Marcus pointed to his toolbox. "There's scrap metal in there." Lyra moved swiftly to the box, her movements more fluid than they had been the previous day. She selected several metal pieces, then opened the cabin door, just enough to toss them in different directions into the snow. "It will create a disruption in their scanning field," she explained, returning to his side. "But we must move now, while they investigate the anomalies." Marcus dressed quickly, grabbing his hunting rifle more out of habit than any belief it would be effective. "There's a ravine about a mile east with an old cave system. The miners used it for smuggling decades ago." They slipped out the back door into the biting cold of pre-dawn. Lyra immediately stumbled, her legs buckling beneath her. "I cannot," she gasped, her skin rapidly taking on a darker blue hue. "Too far from heat source?" Without thinking, Marcus scooped her up, her body frighteningly light in his arms. Even through his thermal clothing, the cold emanating from her was intense. They moved through the forest as quickly as possible, Marcus setting each foot carefully to minimize their tracks in the snow. Behind them, the red scanning beam had stopped its methodical sweep and was now darting erratically between the metal pieces Lyra had thrown. They reached the ravine just as the first rays of sunlight began to pierce the forest canopy. The entrance to the cave system was partially obscured by fallen rocks and overgrown with hardy winter vines. But Marcus found it easily, having used it as an emergency shelter during particularly harsh storms. Inside, the temperature was marginally warmer than the open air, though still well below freezing. Lyra's condition had deteriorated during their flight. Her breathing was shallow, her skin now almost indigo. Marcus laid her down on the cave floor and quickly gathered what little dry material he could find. Old leaves, twigs, the remains of a previous fire he'd built months ago. Using his survival lighter, he coaxed a small flame to life, positioning Lyra as close to it as was safe. "We need to keep moving deeper," he said, helping her to her feet once the fire had imparted some warmth to her. "There's a whole network of tunnels that runs for miles under this mountain. We can lose them in there." Lyra nodded weakly, leaning heavily against him as they moved further into the darkness. The cave gradually narrowed, then opened into a larger chamber where the temperature was noticeably higher. Geothermal activity, somewhere deep below, creating a natural haven from the winter cold. "This will help," Marcus said, settling her against a relatively smooth rock wall. "We should be safe here for a while." Lyra's eyes, which had dimmed during their escape, slowly regained some of their luminosity. They will not give up so easily. The scanner was just the first wave, a reconnaissance tool. They will send heavier units next. "Who exactly is they?" Marcus demanded, now that they had reached relative safety. "You promised explanations." Lyra drew a deep breath, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm slightly too measured to be natural. "I am from a star system you call Elzeth. My people have been observing Earth for centuries, but direct contact is forbidden under interplanetary law." She gestured to her blue skin. "This is not my natural appearance. The pigmentation is a side effect of the rapid atmospheric adaptation process I underwent during emergency planetfall. My kind typically appears, much like yours, with minor physiological differences." "You're telling me you're an alien princess on the run from space cops?" Marcus's tone was flat with disbelief. Simplistic, but essentially correct," she replied without a hint of irony. "I was to be married to the sovereign of a neighboring system to secure mining rights for rare elements. Such arrangements are common practice in our royal structures. But I refused to be used as a political instrument." She pulled aside the collar of her strange, form-fitting garment to reveal an intricate pattern of scarring around her collarbone. "This was my thermal regulator. I disabled it to prevent tracking, but that left me vulnerable to your planet's temperature variations." Marcus was about to respond when a faint sound reached them from the cave entrance, the soft whine of machinery, different from the scanner they'd heard earlier, more ominous. "They've found the cave," he whispered, instinctively reaching for his rifle. Lyra's expression hardened. Scout ship, much more dangerous than the scanner. She reached into a concealed pocket in her garment and withdrew a small device, no larger than a coin. "This is a frequency disruptor, part of my thermal regulator that I salvaged. I can use it to create a false death signal, but I need time to calibrate it." The mechanical whine grew louder, now accompanied by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, multiple sets, moving with military precision. "How much time?" Marcus asked, checking his rifle's ammunition. 5 minutes, perhaps less," she replied, her fingers working with blurring speed on the tiny device. "I'll buy you that time," he said, moving toward the tunnel that led back to the cave entrance. "Stay here." The narrow tunnel curved sharply several times, creating natural choke points that would limit their pursuers' ability to advance in numbers. Marcus positioned himself at one such bend, using the rocky outcropping as cover. He didn't have to wait long. 3 figures appeared, moving in perfect synchronization. They were humanoid in shape but dressed in armor, unlike anything he'd seen. Sleek, almost liquid in appearance, with helmets that completely obscured their features. Each carried what looked like a weapon, though the design was so foreign he couldn't identify any recognizable components. Marcus steadied his breathing, then fired a single shot at the lead figure. The rifle report was deafening in the confined space of the cave, but to his shock, the bullet seemed to slow as it approached its target, then simply dropped to the ground as if it had struck an invisible wall. The 3 figures paused. Then the leader raised a hand to its helmet, a communication gesture. A moment later, all 3 raised their weapons simultaneously. Marcus barely had time to duck back behind the rock before the air, where he had been standing, erupted in a shower of energy pulses. The stone beside him exploded into fragments, sending razor-sharp shards in all directions. A piece caught him across the cheek, opening a shallow but painful gash. Knowing his rifle was useless, Marcus retreated further into the tunnel, trying to lead the pursuers away from where Lyra was working. He threw rocks, fired occasional shots to maintain their attention, always staying just ahead of their advancing line. When he estimated at least 5 minutes had passed, he circled back through a side passage he knew connected to the main chamber. Lyra was still there, the small device now glowing with an intense blue light. "It's ready," she said, looking up as he entered. "But we need to be in the deepest part of the cave system for it to work properly. The signal must appear to come from a place where we could be trapped with no escape." Marcus nodded grimly, blood still trickling from the cut on his cheek. "There's a chamber about 100 yards deeper that dead ends. Used to be a mining operation before they hit solid granite. But we need to hurry. Those things are right behind me." They moved deeper into the cave, Lyra now moving more steadily, the ambient warmth of the geothermal activity clearly benefiting her physiology. The tunnel gradually sloped downward, the air growing warmer and more humid as they descended. The chamber Marcus had mentioned was larger than the previous one, with the unmistakable signs of old mining operations, rusted rail tracks embedded in the floor, the remains of support beams, ancient tools abandoned decades ago. "This is perfect," Lyra said, kneeling in the center of the chamber. She placed the small device on the ground before her, then removed 2 more components from hidden pockets in her garment. "I need to create a thermal cascade that will register as a fatal temperature band collapse." Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, the methodical footsteps now accompanied by the electronic chirping of communication devices. "How long?" Marcus asked, positioning himself at the chamber entrance, his useless rifle still clutched in his hands. 30 seconds to calibrate, another 20 to generate the pulse," she replied, her fingers working with inhuman precision on the tiny components. The first of their pursuers appeared at the far end of the tunnel, leading to the chamber. Marcus fired his remaining rounds, knowing they would have no effect, but hoping to create a momentary distraction. The figure paused, assessing the situation, then raised its weapon. A blinding beam of energy seared through the air, missing Marcus by inches and striking the cave wall behind him. The rock superheated instantly, then exploded outward in a shower of molten fragments. Marcus dove to the side, rolling behind a large boulder as two more energy beams struck near his previous position. "Lyra!" he shouted over the deafening sound of rocks splitting from the heat. 20 more seconds, she called back, not looking up from her work. Two more pursuers had joined the first, their weapons creating a crossfire pattern that methodically destroyed every potential piece of cover in the chamber. Marcus stayed low, crawling toward Lyra as superheated rock fragments rained down around them. One of the pursuers advanced into the chamber, its armor gleaming in the strange light generated by their weapons. It raised its arm, aiming directly at Lyra's unprotected back. Marcus launched himself forward without thinking, tackling Lyra to the ground just as an energy beam passed through the space where she had been kneeling. They rolled together, coming to rest against the far wall of the chamber. "Now!" Lyra gasped, clutching the assembled device in her hand. She pressed a sequence of symbols etched into its surface, and a wave of blue-white energy erupted outward in all directions. The effect was immediate and dramatic. All three pursuers froze in place, their weapons powering down with an audible whine. The leader tilted its head as if listening to something, then made a sharp gesture to the others. All three immediately retreated, moving back up the tunnel with the same precision they had shown during their advance. "What just happened?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse from the superheated air he'd been breathing. The pulse created a thermal signature consistent with a fatal biological cascade. Essentially, it made them believe I'm dead, Lyra explained, her luminous eyes tracking the retreating figures. It also generated a localized electromagnetic pulse that temporarily disabled their weapons and communications. "Will they come back?" "Not immediately. They will report my death to their command structure. It will buy us time, perhaps days, perhaps only hours." The chamber fell silent except for the occasional cracking of cooling rock and the drip of water from the ceiling. The danger temporarily passed. Marcus became acutely aware of the pain from his various cuts and burns, as well as the exhaustion of their frantic escape. Lyra seemed to sense his fatigue. "You need rest," she said, her tone softer than he had heard before. "The thermal energy you expended protecting me has depleted your biological reserves." Marcus nodded, allowing himself to slide down the wall into a sitting position. "We should be safe here for a while. The cave system is extensive, and they think you're dead." Lyra settled beside him, her body still radiating cold, but noticeably less intense than before. "Your actions were unexpected," she said, after a long silence. "You risked your life to protect mine, despite having no obligation to do so." Marcus shrugged, wincing as the movement aggravated a burn on his shoulder. "Military training. You don't leave anyone behind." "Is that the only reason?" Her luminous eyes studied his face with that same scientific curiosity he had noted during their first encounter. "Maybe not," he admitted after a moment. "I've been alone out here for a long time. Started to forget what it was like to care about anyone but myself." The confession surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. For years, he had embraced his isolation, convinced that disconnection from humanity was the only way to find peace after what he'd witnessed in combat. Yet in the span of less than 2 days, this strange woman had somehow breached the walls he had so carefully constructed. "My people do not typically form emotional attachments outside of political necessity," Lyra said, her gaze now fixed on the distant tunnel entrance. "Such connections are seen as weaknesses that can be exploited by rival factions." "Sounds lonely," Marcus observed. It is efficient, she countered. But there was a hesitation in her voice that hadn't been there before. Though I am beginning to understand why some might choose a different path. They remained in the chamber for hours, taking turns keeping watch while the other rested. Lyra's condition continued to improve in the relative warmth of the deep cave, her skin gradually shifting from deep blue to a lighter shade that almost appeared human in the dim light. As what Marcus estimated to be evening approached, they decided it was safe enough to risk a small fire. Using dried remnants of the old wooden support beams, he created a carefully controlled blaze that provided both warmth and a way to heat the emergency rations he always carried in his hunting pack. As they shared the simple meal, Lyra's questions about human life became more personal, less clinical. She asked about his family, long dead, his military service, classified, his reasons for choosing isolation, complicated. Though he deflected many of her inquiries, he found himself revealing more than he had to anyone in years. In turn, she spoke of her world, a place of breathtaking technological advancement, but rigid social hierarchies, where every aspect of life was governed by political calculations and dynastic considerations. Her escape had been planned for years, a desperate bid for self-determination that had required sacrificing her status, her comfort, and nearly her life. "Why Earth?" Marcus asked, as the fire burned low. "Of all the places you could have gone. Your planet is considered primitive by intergalactic standards," she explained. "The monitoring systems are minimal, and your technology is not yet capable of detecting our presence unless we wish to be detected. It was the perfect hiding place, or would have been, if my thermal regulator had not malfunctioned during the atmospheric entry." Marcus added another piece of wood to the fire. "And now what? You're stranded here with people hunting you, unable to survive without external heat sources." Lyra's expression shifted to something he couldn't quite read. "My physiology will adapt, given sufficient time. Already my cellular structure is beginning to compensate for the thermal differentials of your atmosphere." "Meaning?" "Meaning I will not always need to borrow your warmth," she clarified, a hint of what might have been embarrassment coloring her voice. Though the process is gradual and uncertain, the implication hung between them, that she might be trapped on Earth indefinitely, a fugitive from forces with technology far beyond human capabilities, dependent on his protection until her body could adapt. "If they think you're dead, why not just let them leave?" Marcus suggested. "You could stay hidden, build a new life here." Lyra shook her head, her luminous eyes reflecting the firelight. "The deception will not hold indefinitely. Eventually, they will realize no biological remains were found, and the search will resume, more thoroughly, more aggressively. And when that happens, anyone associated with me will become a target." The fire popped and hissed as a resinous piece of wood caught flame. Marcus stared into the dancing light, weighing options that all seemed equally dangerous. "There's an old bunker about 20 miles from here," he said, finally. "Cold War era, abandoned for decades. It's underground, heavily insulated, with its own power generator. If we can reach it, it might provide better shelter than this cave, somewhere you could safely complete your adaptation." Lyra considered this. The thermal signature of a power generator would be detectable by their scanners. The bunker was designed to be invisible to surveillance, lead-lined walls, minimal heat signature. It might not fool your people's technology completely, but it would buy us more time. "Us?" Lyra raised an eyebrow, the gesture startlingly human. "You would continue to risk yourself for my safety?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I've been hiding from the world for 3 years. Maybe it's time I found something worth coming out of isolation for." The words surprised him, even as he spoke them. But he recognized their truth. Something had awakened in him since Lyra's arrival, a sense of purpose, of connection, that he had believed lost forever in the chaos of combat. Then, we should rest while we can, Lyra said softly. The journey tomorrow will be challenging, especially if we must avoid open terrain. They extinguished the fire to prevent any heat signature from being detected, relying instead on the natural geothermal warmth of the deep cave. In the darkness, Lyra moved closer to Marcus, her body still radiating cold, but noticeably less intense than it had been just a day earlier. Your thermal energy has been essential to my survival, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I am in your debt. No debt, Marcus replied, surprised to find he meant it. Just two people helping each other survive. Sleep came easier than he expected, the exhaustion of their escape finally overtaking his habitual vigilance. When he woke, the absolute darkness of the deep cave made it impossible to determine how much time had passed. But his body's rhythms suggested it was morning. Lyra was already awake, her luminous eyes visible in the darkness as she sat beside him. The passage is clear, she reported. No signs of pursuit overnight. They gathered what supplies remained in Marcus's pack and began the journey back to the surface. The tunnels seemed quieter now, the only sounds their footsteps and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. When they reached the cave entrance, Marcus cautiously surveyed the surrounding forest before signaling it was safe to emerge. The winter landscape was transformed by fresh snowfall, all traces of their previous passage erased by nature. The air was bitter cold, but brilliantly clear, the sun casting long shadows across the pristine white ground. We'll need to move carefully, Marcus said, studying the terrain. The bunker is east of here, mostly through dense forest, but we'll have to cross at least one open valley. Lyra nodded, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. I can manage the cold better today. The cellular adaptation is progressing. Indeed. Her skin had taken on a more normal hue, though still with a faint blue tinge that marked her as distinctly non-human. She moved with greater confidence as well, no longer dependent on constant proximity to Marcus's body heat. They set off through the forest, Marcus setting a deliberate pace that balanced speed with caution. Every few hundred yards, he would stop to listen and scan the sky for any sign of pursuit. The forest remained peaceful, the only movement the occasional startled deer or circling hawk. By midday, they had covered nearly 10 miles, the landscape gradually changing from dense pine forest to more rugged, rocky terrain. They paused to rest in the shelter of a massive boulder, sharing the last of Marcus's emergency rations. The valley crossing will be the most dangerous part, he explained, indicating the open expanse visible through the trees ahead. About half a mile of exposed ground with minimal cover. Once we're across, it's another 8 miles through forest to reach the bunker. Lyra studied the valley, her expression calculating. Their scanners will easily detect us in such open terrain. We need a distraction. She reached into one of the hidden pockets in her garment and withdrew another small device, similar to the one she had used to create the false death signal. This is a thermal beacon, she explained. It can generate a heat signature that will register as a biological entity on their scanners. If we place it far from our crossing point, it might draw their attention long enough for us to reach the forest on the other side. Marcus nodded, impressed by her tactical thinking. There's a rock slide about a mile north of here. If we plant it there, they might think you're trying to use the rocks for cover. They detoured to the rock slide, where Lyra carefully programmed the beacon before concealing it deep within the tumble of stones. As they turned to leave, a faint mechanical hum reached them from somewhere high above, barely audible but unmistakable. Scout ship, Lyra whispered, her body tensing. They've expanded the search perimeter. They froze in place, pressed against the rocks as the sound grew marginally louder, then began to fade again, the ship passing nearby but not directly overhead. The beacon will activate in 15 minutes, Lyra said, once the sound had completely disappeared. We need to be in position to cross the valley by then, They moved with renewed urgency, reaching the forest edge just as a distant, high-pitched whine indicated the beacon had activated. Almost immediately, the mechanical hum returned, now moving rapidly toward the rockslide. "Now!" Marcus urged, and they broke from the cover of the trees, sprinting across the open valley. The snow was deeper here, slowing their progress as they struggled through drifts that sometimes reached mid-thigh. Marcus led the way, breaking a path that Lyra could follow more easily. Despite the bitter cold, sweat soaked his thermal clothing, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he pushed himself to maintain their pace. They were perhaps 2/3 of the way across when the mechanical hum changed pitch, becoming sharper, more focused. Marcus risked a glance over his shoulder and saw a sleek, silver craft hovering above the rockslide, a beam of intense red light scanning the stones. "They've found the beacon," he gasped. "They'll realize it's a decoy any second." Lyra increased her pace, now moving alongside him rather than following. "We need to reach the trees before they widen their scan." They redoubled their efforts, pushing through the last stretch of open ground as the silver craft rose higher, its scanning beam beginning to sweep in wider arcs. Just as they reached the first line of trees, the beam changed color from red to blue, and the craft's engine note deepened ominously. "They've detected us," Lyra said, her voice tight with tension. "We have perhaps 2 minutes before they pinpoint our location." They plunged deeper into the forest, using the dense tree cover to break the scanner's line of sight. The craft followed, hovering just above the canopy, the blue beam penetrating the branches in flashing strobes of light. "There!" Marcus pointed to a steep ravine ahead, its sides thick with underbrush and fallen logs. "If we can get down there, the ground cover might mask our heat signatures." They half ran, half slid down the ravine's treacherous slope, using the trees for handholds to control their descent. At the bottom, a shallow stream flowed beneath a partial crust of ice. Without hesitation, Marcus broke through the ice and waded into the frigid water. "It will mask our thermal trail," he explained, through chattering teeth, extending his hand to Lyra. She joined him in the stream, showing no reaction to the extreme cold that was already sending waves of pain through Marcus's legs. They waded upstream for several hundred yards, the water never rising above their knees, but cold enough to make every step an act of will. Above them, the scout ship continued to hover, its scanning beam sweeping back and forth across the forest canopy. Gradually, its search pattern moved away from them, the blue beam returning to red as it expanded its radius. "It's working," Lyra whispered. "They've lost our trail." Eventually, they left the stream, their clothing frozen stiff within minutes of exposure to the air. Marcus led them on a circuitous route through the densest parts of the forest, backtracking occasionally to further confuse any pursuit. The scout ship's sound grew fainter and eventually disappeared entirely, though neither of them relaxed their vigilance. As twilight began to settle over the forest, they reached a small clearing containing what appeared to be an abandoned utility shed. Its corrugated metal walls were rusted, the single window broken, the door hanging precariously from one hinge. "The bunker entrance," Marcus explained, pushing aside the damaged door. Inside, beneath a rotting plywood floor, was a heavy steel hatch secured with a complex mechanical lock. Marcus knelt beside it, his fingers, numb from cold and exertion, working the combination with practiced precision. The lock clicked open, and he heaved the hatch upward to reveal a steep metal ladder descending into darkness. "Ladies first," he said with a grim smile, gesturing toward the opening. Lyra descended without hesitation, her movements graceful despite her exhaustion. Marcus followed, pulling the hatch closed above them and engaging interior locks that would prevent it from being opened from the outside. At the bottom of the ladder, they stood in absolute darkness until Marcus located and activated an old emergency lantern. Its pale yellow light revealed a concrete corridor extending deeper underground. The walls lined with faded civil defense posters and rusting pipes. "This way," he said, leading her through a series of turns until they reached a heavy blast door. Another combination lock yielded to his touch, and the door swung open to reveal the bunker proper, a surprisingly large space divided into several rooms, filled with dusty but intact furniture and equipment. "The government built these during the Cold War," Marcus explained, as he moved through the space, activating systems with practiced efficiency. "This one was decommissioned in the 90s, but the backup generator still works on diesel fuel. I've been maintaining it as an emergency fallback." Lights flickered on overhead as the generator rumbled to life, somewhere behind the concrete walls. The sudden brightness revealed a space that, while utilitarian, offered far more comfort than the cave had provided. A kitchen area with non-perishable supplies, sleeping quarters with military-style bunks, even a crude bathroom with running water fed from an underground well. "It's not exactly luxury accommodation," Marcus said, noticing Lyra's careful inspection of their surroundings. "But it's secure, insulated, and off the grid. We should be safe here while you adapt." Lyra completed her survey of the bunker, then turned to face him directly. "You have done far more for me than I had any right to expect," she said, her luminous eyes holding his gaze. "I do not understand why." Marcus busied himself with checking the bunker's systems, uncomfortable with the directness of her question. "Let's just say I recognize what it's like to be hunted, to need somewhere to hide and heal." "Your military service," she deduced. "You were a soldier who saw things that changed you." "Something like that," he admitted, still not meeting her eyes. "Enough that I chose to live alone in the wilderness, rather than be around people who couldn't possibly understand." Lyra moved closer to him, her presence now radiating a gentle warmth, rather than the intense cold of their first encounter. "And yet you risked everything to help a stranger, a non-human stranger, at that." "Maybe I'm just tired of being alone," Marcus said, finally looking up to meet her gaze. "Or maybe I recognized something in you that I understood. Someone else who needed to escape, to find a place where they could just be." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and possibilities. Then the generator sputtered briefly, breaking the silence and reminding them of their more immediate concerns. "We should rest," Marcus said, moving toward the supply storage. "Get some food in us, dry clothes, proper sleep. Tomorrow we can figure out a long-term plan." They spent the evening in domestic tasks that felt strangely normal given their extraordinary circumstances. Preparing a meal from the bunker's supplies, finding dry clothing to replace their frozen garments, establishing a watch rotation to ensure their security. The simple routine helped calm the adrenaline that had sustained them throughout their journey, allowing exhaustion to finally claim its due. Marcus took the first watch, sitting near the bunker's security monitors, old but functional technology that provided views of the surrounding forest through carefully concealed cameras. Lyra retreated to one of the sleeping quarters, her adaptation process apparently requiring periods of deep rest. As he watched the peaceful darkness outside, Marcus confronted the reality of their situation. He had abandoned his cabin, his carefully constructed isolation, to protect someone he barely knew, someone not even human. The decision should have filled him with regret or at least anxiety. Yet he felt more alive, more purposeful than he had in years. The night passed without incident, and when Lyra emerged from her rest period, Marcus was struck by the transformation. Her skin had shifted further toward a human tone, the blue tinge now visible only in certain lights, or when she experienced strong emotions. Her eyes still retained their luminous quality, but subdued, less alien. "The adaptation is accelerating," she explained, noticing his surprise. "Your planet's atmosphere contains elements that interact with my cellular structure in ways I hadn't anticipated. The process is Uncomfortable, but effective. Uncomfortable how? Marcus asked, concerned. Imagine every cell in your body being simultaneously disassembled and reconstructed, she said, matter-of-factly. It is not painful, exactly, but intensely disorienting. Over the following days, they established a routine within the confines of the bunker. Marcus would check the perimeter twice daily, venturing out in carefully timed patterns to ensure no pursuit had tracked them. Lyra focused on completing her adaptation. Periods of intense activity interspersed with longer stretches of what she called cellular recalibration, a state somewhere between sleep and meditation. During their waking hours together, the barriers between them gradually eroded. Marcus found himself sharing stories from his past that he had never told another soul, the classified operations that had left him questioning humanity's capacity for compassion, the losses that had driven him to isolation, the nightmares that still plagued him years later. Lyra, in turn, revealed more about her world, its breathtaking technological achievements alongside its rigid social structures, the beauty of cities that floated among the clouds, and the ugliness of political machinations that treated individuals as mere resources to be allocated for maximum benefit. "Your people are not so different from mine," she observed one evening as they shared a meal. "Less advanced in technology, perhaps, but following the same patterns, creating rigid systems that ultimately serve those in power while claiming to benefit everyone. Some of us try to live outside those systems," Marcus replied. "That's what I was doing in my cabin." "Were you, though?" Lyra's penetrating gaze made him uncomfortable. "Or were you simply hiding from one system without creating anything better to replace it?" The question lingered with Marcus long after their conversation ended. Had his isolation been an act of rebellion against the systems that had used and discarded him, or merely an extension of the damage those systems had inflicted, a retreat rather than a reclamation? On the 7th day of their bunker existence, the security monitors captured movement in the forest above. 3 figures moving with mechanical precision through the trees, scanning devices in their hands. Their armor was different from the pursuers in the cave, heavier and more ornate, suggesting a higher rank or specialized function. "Elite Guard," Lyra confirmed, her expression grim as she studied the footage. "They would not be deployed unless the standard units had failed repeatedly. They can detect biological signatures through up to 10 meters of solid rock." Marcus checked the bunker's depth, 15 meters at its shallowest point, 20 at the sleeping quarters. "Will that be enough?" "Perhaps," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "But we should prepare for the possibility that it won't be." They spent the day in tense preparation, gathering what weapons they could from the bunker's limited arsenal: a few handguns, a shotgun, even some ancient grenades that Marcus wasn't entirely certain would still function. Lyra modified their crude human weapons with components from her remaining devices, enhancing their effectiveness in ways Marcus could barely comprehend. "This will disrupt their armor's energy field," she explained, attaching a small silver disc to the barrel of the shotgun. "It won't penetrate completely, but it will create enough of a gap for the projectiles to cause damage." As night fell, the Elite Guard disappeared from the camera feeds, their heat signatures vanishing as completely as if they had teleported away. Marcus and Lyra remained vigilant, knowing this likely indicated not retreat, but a more sophisticated approach. Shortly after midnight, a new sound reached them, not the mechanical hum of the scout ship, but a deeper, more resonant vibration that seemed to come from within the Earth itself. "Ground-penetrating scanner," Lyra whispered, her skin taking on a blue tinge as stress affected her still incomplete adaptation. "They're mapping the bunker's layout." For hours, the vibration continued, occasionally shifting in pitch or intensity as the unseen device focused on different areas of their underground shelter. Marcus and Lyra moved constantly, never remaining in one place long enough for the scanner to get a fixed reading on their biological signatures. Near dawn, the vibration stopped abruptly, leaving a silence more ominous than the sound had been. They waited, positioned at opposite ends of the main room, weapons ready, eyes fixed on the blast door that was their only physical protection from what might come. The attack, when it came, was not from the door, but through the concrete ceiling itself. A perfect circle of material simply vanished, converted to fine dust that drifted down like snow, revealing a shimmering energy field through which 3 armored figures descended. Marcus fired immediately, the modified shotgun bucking in his hands. The lead figure's armor rippled where the shot struck, the energy field visibly distorting before stabilizing. The figure staggered but did not fall. Lyra moved with inhuman speed, a weapon of her own design, cobbled together from bunker parts and her alien technology, emitting a concentrated beam of blue-white energy that struck the second figure squarely in the chest. Its armor failed catastrophically, components shorting out in a shower of sparks as the figure collapsed. The third elite guard raised both arms, the armor on its forearms reconfiguring into what were clearly offensive weapons. Marcus dove for cover as the air where he had been standing erupted in a storm of energy pulses that reduced everything they touched to molecular ash. The bunker became a chaos of light and sound, energy weapons discharging, concrete shattering, metal superheating and warping. Marcus fired repeatedly at the guards, each shot causing minimal damage but forcing them to divide their attention between 2 targets. Lyra had maneuvered behind the supply shelving, using it as partial cover while she worked frantically on another device, larger than the previous ones. Components harvested from the bunker's electronics, hastily integrated with her alien technology. "I need 30 more seconds," she shouted, over the cacophony of battle. "You've got it," Marcus replied, abandoning his increasingly ineffective shotgun for the grenades. He pulled the pin on one, counted 2 seconds, then threw it directly at the feet of the nearest guard. The explosion was deafening in the confined space, the concussive force knocking Marcus back several feet. When the dust cleared, the guard was still standing but noticeably damaged. Its armor cracked in several places, movements now jerky and uncoordinated. The lead guard, apparently recognizing the greater threat, turned its attention fully to Lyra, both arm weapons charging with a high-pitched whine that promised devastation. Marcus didn't think. He simply acted, launching himself across the room. He tackled the guard from behind, the momentum carrying them both into the concrete wall with bone-jarring force. The guard's weapons discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as Marcus grappled with it, seeking any vulnerability in the advanced armor. Finding none, he resorted to brute force, pinning the guard against the wall while shouting to Lyra, "Now! Do it now!" Lyra activated her device, and the bunker was filled with a pulsing blue light that seemed to bend and distort as it spread outward. The effect on the elite guards was immediate and dramatic. Their armor seized up, locking them in place as if frozen in time. "What did you do?" Marcus gasped, releasing his hold on the immobilized guard and staggering back. "Temporal disruption field," Lyra explained, her voice strained with effort as she maintained the device's operation. "It creates a localized bubble where time moves differently, much slower for them, normal for us. It won't last long, but it should give us enough time to escape." "Escape to where?" Marcus demanded, gesturing to the ruined bunker around them. "They found us here. They'll find us anywhere." Lyra's expression was resolute as she adjusted the device's settings. "Not if they believe we're dead, truly dead this time, with verifiable remains." Understanding dawned on Marcus. "You're going to collapse the bunker." She nodded. "The temporal field will prevent them from escaping the blast radius. Their own command will register it as a tragic miscalculation. 3 elite guards, lost in a successful elimination of the target. And us? How do we survive a bunker collapse?" Lyra pointed to a narrow maintenance shaft in the far corner of the room, a secondary escape route Marcus had shown her during their first day. That shaft connects to an old drainage system that extends beyond the bunker's perimeter. If we can reach it before the charges detonate. Charges? What charges? Lyra gestured to several points around the room, where she had placed small devices harvested from the guards' own weapons. Approximately 45 seconds remaining before they overload. They grabbed what supplies they could carry in the limited time: water, some food, a first aid kit, and hurried to the maintenance shaft. Marcus went first, climbing the narrow ladder as quickly as possible. Lyra following close behind with the temporal disruption device still clutched in one hand. The drainage system was even narrower than the shaft, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees through decades of accumulated grime. Behind them, a deep rumbling began to build, the concrete walls around them vibrating with increasing intensity. "Faster," Lyra urged, her voice tight with strain. "The temporal field is collapsing." They redoubled their pace, ignoring the scrapes and bruises as they scrambled through the confined space. The rumbling grew to a roar, dust and small debris raining down on them from the ceiling of the tunnel. Just as the sound reached a crescendo, they emerged from the drainage pipe into a small ravine about a quarter-mile from the bunker entrance. Behind them, the ground shuddered violently, then seemed to sigh as it settled. A plume of dust rose from the forest where the bunker had been, the only visible sign of the destruction that had occurred deep underground. They didn't stop to watch, continuing to move away from the site as quickly as their exhausted bodies would allow. Only when they had put several miles between themselves and the collapsed bunker did they pause to rest, finding shelter in a small, natural cave formed by an overhanging rock ledge. "Do you think it worked?" Marcus asked, as they huddled together for warmth, the winter night closing in around them. "The elite guard would have been carrying biological verification modules," Lyra replied. "When they are recovered from the rubble, their data will confirm my death. Cellular dissolution consistent with complete biological termination. The hunt will be officially concluded." "And unofficially?" Lyra's expression was somber. "There may be those who remain suspicious, who would continue the search out of an abundance of caution. But without official sanction, their resources will be limited, their methods less thorough." Marcus absorbed this information, trying to gauge their chances. "So we're not completely safe, but we're safer than we were before." "Yes," she agreed, "and my adaptation is nearly complete. Soon I will be able to pass as human in all but the most detailed medical examination." The implication hung between them, that once her adaptation was complete, she would no longer need his protection, his warmth, his companionship. The thought created an unexpected hollow feeling in Marcus's chest. "What will you do then?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. "When you can blend in with humans, live among them without detection." Lyra was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the last traces of daylight were fading. "I had not planned beyond escape," she admitted finally. "Survival consumed all my attention, all my resources." She turned to face him directly, her luminous eyes searching his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. "But now, I find myself contemplating possibilities I had not considered before. A life not defined by royal obligations or political necessity, but by choice." "What kind of life would you choose?" Marcus asked softly, aware that they had moved into territory far more intimate than survival tactics and escape plans. "One with purpose," she replied without hesitation. "One where I could use my knowledge to benefit others, rather than serve power structures. One where connections are formed through mutual respect and—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Affection, rather than strategic advantage." The word hung in the air between them, laden with implications neither was quite ready to articulate. Instead, they sat in companionable silence as night fully claimed the forest, the stars emerging one by one overhead. "We should find more permanent shelter tomorrow," Marcus said eventually, practical concerns reasserting themselves. "Somewhere we can recover properly, plan our next steps." Lyra nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Your cabin is likely still being monitored, but there must be other isolated places where we could establish ourselves." "I know a few," Marcus confirmed. "Places most humans avoid, let alone alien search parties." The days that followed tested them in different ways than the frantic escape had. Finding food, creating shelter, avoiding the occasional human hunter or hiker, all while Lyra completed her physiological adaptation, required constant vigilance and improvisation. They eventually settled in an abandoned ranger station, deep in the national forest. Its official existence erased by budget cuts decades earlier, but the structure still sound enough to provide protection from the elements. Marcus used his mechanical skills to repair the old wood stove and generator, while Lyra applied her advanced knowledge to creating rudimentary but effective perimeter alarms from salvaged electronics. As weeks passed, their existence took on an almost domestic rhythm. Marcus would hunt or fish for their food, maintain their shelter, and teach Lyra about human customs and behaviors she would need to know. Lyra, in turn, continued to adapt not just physically but culturally. Her observations about humanity sometimes amusingly accurate, other times profoundly insightful. Her physiological transformation progressed until, to casual observation, she appeared entirely human, her skin a warm olive tone, her eyes still striking but no longer luminous in darkness. Only in moments of strong emotion would hints of her true nature emerge, a faint blue tinge to her skin when frightened or angry, a subtle glow to her eyes when particularly focused or passionate. "I no longer require your body heat for survival," she announced one evening as they sat beside the wood stove, sharing a meal of venison and wild plants. "My cellular adaptation has stabilized. I can maintain optimal temperature independently now." Marcus nodded, unsurprised by the development but uncertain how to respond. During their weeks together, their physical proximity had become a comfortable habit, neither commenting on the fact that they continued to sleep side by side long after her biological need for his warmth had diminished. "That's good," he said finally, focusing on his plate. "Means you're safer now, more independent." Lyra studied him with that penetrating gaze that always made him feel she could see far more than his expression. "Does it disturb you?" she asked directly. "That I am not human?" The question caught him off guard. "No," he answered truthfully. "I stopped thinking of you as alien weeks ago. You're just Lyra." Something softened in her expression. "On my world, individuals are valued for their utility, genetic compatibility, political connections, specialized skills. Emotional attachment is seen as a weakness, a distraction from more rational considerations." "Sounds like a lonely way to live," Marcus observed, echoing his words from their time in the cave. "It is efficient," she replied, again repeating her previous response, but this time with a small smile that acknowledged the pattern. "Yet, I find myself increasingly convinced that your species may have discovered something mine has forgotten. That connection, belonging, even love, are not weaknesses but strengths, that they give life meaning beyond mere existence or achievement." The word love hung in the air between them, neither willing to be the first to acknowledge it directly. Instead, Marcus reached across the table and took her hand in his, a simple gesture that somehow conveyed more than words could have. Spring arrived gradually, the forest around them transforming from stark, winter simplicity to vibrant new growth. They ventured further from their shelter, carefully at first, then with growing confidence as months passed with no sign of pursuit. Lyra's adaptation continued to refine itself, her understanding of human culture deepening through Marcus's teachings and her own observations. They established a life together that combined elements of both their worlds, her advanced knowledge helping to improve their shelter with innovations beyond current human technology, his practical skills ensuring their survival in the wilderness. They rarely spoke of the future beyond the immediate term, both aware that the shadow of her pursuers might never fully disappear, but finding contentment in the present they had created together. One morning, as dawn broke over the forest with particular beauty, Marcus found Lyra standing at the edge of the clearing, her face turned toward the rising sun. He joined her silently, respecting her apparent meditation. "On my world, the sunrise is blue," she said without turning. "The atmospheric composition creates a spectral shift that humans would find alien and perhaps disturbing. Yet I find I prefer this golden light. It feels more alive." Marcus studied her profile, struck by how natural she looked in this environment that should have been utterly foreign to her. "Do you miss it? Your world?" She considered the question carefully before answering. "I miss certain aspects, the floating cities, the knowledge repositories, the artistic achievements of millennia. But I do not miss what it demanded of me, what it would have made of me." She turned to face him fully, her expression solemn, yet serene. "I was born into a society that saw me only as a political asset. Here, I am simply myself, free to choose, to learn, to—" She hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty. "To love." The word, spoken plainly at last, seemed to release something that had been building between them for months. Marcus stepped closer, one hand gently touching her cheek in a gesture that asked a question without words. Her answer came as she leaned into his touch, her eyes, still faintly luminous in certain lights, meeting his without reservation. When their lips met, it felt like the natural conclusion to a journey that had begun in danger and desperation but had transformed into something neither could have anticipated. Later, as they walked hand in hand along the forest edge, Marcus asked the question that had lingered unspoken. "Are you sure this is what you want? A life hidden away from both your world and mine?" Lyra's smile held a complexity of emotions, certainty alongside acknowledgement of all they had sacrificed and might yet face. "What I want is a life of my own choosing, not one prescribed by birth or tradition. What I want is to continue discovering this world, and myself within it." Her hand tightened around his. "What I want is to share that journey with someone who understands what it means to seek a different path." As they stood together, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, Marcus felt a sense of peace he had not known since before his military service, perhaps had never truly known at all. The future remained uncertain, the possibility of discovery and danger never entirely absent. But for the first time in years, he looked forward to tomorrow with anticipation rather than dread. "As long as we're together," he said softly, giving voice to the commitment they both felt. "We'll face whatever comes." Lyra nodded, her expression reflecting the same certainty. "As long as we choose each other," she agreed. "Everything else is just details." They turned back toward their shelter, not the isolated cabin where Marcus had hidden from the world, nor the royal chambers where Lyra had been a political pawn, but a new place they had created together, a home built on choice rather than obligation, on connection rather than isolation, on love rather than fear. Whatever dangers might still lurk beyond the forest edge, they would face them together, two beings from different worlds who had found, against all probability, a shared path forward, a future that neither could have imagined alone, but that both now embraced with quiet determination and hard-won hope.